for being with us for the council meeting. No formal meeting, so we could go all night long. Except that Councilmember Kitchen will need to be excused for part of the meeting tonight. He gets to go have a conversation with the University of Utah. Sounds like about educational mobility. You can correct me if I'm miscategorizing that.
I'll report back.
He'll report back. We'll find out. Sorry, I'm just looking for my agenda. Does anyone want to? I see.
The written briefing is on the future.
I don't know where I put my agenda. Thank you. The reason we have a written briefing on funding our future is we're still getting some answers back on our discussion from last week, so expect to dive back in on the 15th next week, okay?
I have another question too.
Throw it out there.
And that is in regards to the sales tax. Is looking at an ordinance or something, colleagues, for support in that if the sales tax ever does go above that threshold of 33 million, whatever it is for that 0.5%, that we allocate that money to one of the 4 silos to be decided by the council. Meaning, let me think here. I just had a brain cramp. Streets, affordable housing, transit, or public safety.
That's brilliant. Start drafting.
So can I, my thoughts on this, just so you can, my thoughts are to make sure that we always ensure that sales tax money, whatever amount of money is coming in, is always separate from general fund. No matter what revenues are coming in, be it above 33 million, 25 million, or below.
That 0.5%.
Right? That 0.5% needs to stay segregated from the general fund. On the positive side, then you can spend it in those 4 areas. On the negative side, you've got to figure out where we're going to cut in those 4 areas as well, right, going forward. So that is my goal once the budget is adopted, to figure out how we segregate that 0.5% off and keep it completely separate.
I love that. Thank you.
So you're saying there's a way?
Sounds like there's a way.
Yeah, there's a way.
Cool.
Yeah, because it's going to come in separately. Because it's going to come in separately, we could create a separate fund, accounting-wise.
Right, I think,
But accounting-wise, but
I
we're talking
think
about.
within the general silo of the new sales tax, whatever council is in place at that time, subject to contracts and staffing, will have the discretion to allocate those funds within
Yeah, no
that
matter
silo.
what ordinance we come up with, another council can just as easily get rid of it.
Darn it.
But, I mean, at least for us, it would tie our hands, right? We would bind us to do that.
Bond.
Contract, bond. Okay. Anything else on the written briefing? Then we'll move on to the fiscal year 2018-19 budget administration overview. Mary Beth Thompson, our Director of Finance, thank you for being here with us,
Thank you for having me today.
and your team as well. Do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So I have Lisa Packwood and John Bike. Lisa's going to go over the revenues. These are general fund revenues only. These do not include the $25 million sales tax or any enterprise or internal service fund revenues. We purposely left out the $25 million because you already know that it's $25 million. I don't need to go into the detail on that.
As this is our first real bite into the budget book, I know that, and I appreciate that you have slide presentations, but council members have got their budget books out, and if it's possible to orient us to page numbers or anything so we can work out of here more. It's easier for us to keep track of this than a bunch of separate packets. It's helpful if you can, but I just put you on the spot.
You did, but that's okay. I'll get you there.
Well, I mean, generally, the general fund key changes are on B17. So I'll be hitting some of those highlights here.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm just going to hit on some of the highlights of the major revenue categories as we go through here. The first one will be our property taxes. This is a graph showing, some of the history of property tax revenues, budget to actuals. This year, in 2018, property tax revenue is coming in just slightly over budget by about $469,000. and that is due to personal property. Real property is down, and we are researching that. We believe that it may have to do with the collection of centrally assessed. So we are working with the county and with the state to try and resolve that question. The budget for FY19 for all of property tax types is $103 million. 103,395. This includes the judgment levy and some new growth of 1.3 million. Regarding sales tax receipts, this is just sales tax, doesn't include any use. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I added these for your viewing pleasure. These are some of the residential and commercial property values by district, so that you can see the changes that are happening in there. So that one's the residential property by district, and then if you'll move to that next one, it's the commercial properties. Any questions on those?
Have those changed? Yeah, it's kind of hard to see.
Yeah, I can provide you with the actual numbers behind those so that you can look at those.
Thanks.
To the residential?
Maybe the voting could be based on that.
So note that these are only for calendar year 2017. We haven't received calendar year 2018. We'll receive those about the same time we receive the property tax information for values, and then we'll update this information. We used to have this information on GIS. I'm hoping to get it back on GIS and make it live so that you guys can review it and see the percentage differences and changes in values going forward.
The other thing to remember that a lot of people forget is that residential value is, residential property gets a 45% exemption in terms of what they pay. So even though the value, you see the value curve, in terms of what they actually pay to the city, just cut that in about half, so.
I had a question on the commercial slide. We have heard that Third West is our second highest sales tax generating. Is that, correct me if I'm wrong, area of the city outside of the CBD? And I know this is property value and not sales tax generation, but I think that's, to look at District 5 down there at the bottom and to think about the fact, I mean, this for me emphasizes the RDA project area that we're about to create, that the property they produce, there's a lot of money produced in that area, and does it get regenerated back into the properties? No. And is that all our fault? No. But I think it's fascinating that we have District 5 at the bottom with the second highest tax generating area running through District 5.
And is it sales tax that is there?
That's what I asked for. I
So,
think it's sales tax, and I know that I said that at the beginning, that this is not sales tax that we're looking at, but it's,
But it'd be interesting to have sales tax figures by district, I wonder.
So is that, the Third West sales tax, is that the entire Third West, all of Salt Lake City, or just in the downtown area?
not
Do
the
you know?
downtown area, was my understanding. And I'm trying to remember,
So are you're talking Costco?
Yeah, just the big box stores.
The
that
box
whole
stores.
area.
Box stores?
Yeah.
right?
We can come up with that number.
And I think it just speaks to us creating an RDA project area there, that
Mhm.
there's a real discrepancy between value generated in an area and investment in the land itself and the public property in that area.
Correct.
Anyway. We can talk later.
Okay, so moving on to sales tax. Sales tax this year in FY18 is expected to come in at about $1.8 million over budget. So we've taken that same percentage and increased the FY19 budget. It's about it's about 5.8% increase. So we're expecting that current trend to continue. That's a really good point, though, to see those same numbers by district. So we didn't do that here, but we can certainly do that for you.
Are we just conservative in estimating sales tax and therefore it's always a little under the actuals?
I'm sorry?
Are we always conservative in estimating sales tax, therefore it's always under the actuals, or is that
No,
reversed?
it's growing faster than what we can't keep up with when we project it.
Yeah.
We always think we're going to hit the mark. Like last year, I put in a significant increase in sales tax and thought, oh, we're going to come in right at budget. And we're not. We're exceeding budget, which is good, right? But so then we put in another large increase this year. Hopefully, we will meet that mark. It's always increasing higher than last year. Our increase was about 3.5%.
Okay.
And so we thought, well, we'll increase our budget significantly. It's coming in at 5.8% this year, so it's growing faster than we can actually project a budget 18 months down the road.
So during the recession, is it a similar pattern as well?
Yep, except
Consistently, huh?
faster.
Faster, huh?
Yeah, much faster. During the recession, we dropped, it took us 6 years to come out of the hole to bring us back up to where 2007's numbers were. In 2007, it was $47 million. It took us 5 years to come back up to that $47 million. And now we're going to be at about 60 million.
But our estimates are consistently lower than the actuals that come in afterwards, is that correct?
Yeah, because we just can't keep up with, I mean,
Jennifer has something to add for us.
I think the finance department does a great job of forecasting based on actuals that are received and sort of tempering with a little bit of caution. But I'll just say during the 2009 crash, it was mid-year. So we adopted a budget with a very, very, very conservative sales tax growth estimate and didn't even make that mark. And so, you know, when the economy contracts, you don't know how far it is. And so there's just always that caution that just because you've been good at predicting in the past doesn't mean you can predict the future. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Okay.
And to that point, will you go back a slide, John? Yep. I wondered if you could come back to us with maybe a 15-year timeline, and listening to, we've had several opportunities in the last little while to join the Gardner Policy Institute and some of their discussions around forecasts and housing and the reality of sort of a 7-year cycle coming upon us. I'm wondering if we stretch this out, what we see, recognizing that the 2008 recession isn't necessarily, hopefully, on that short cycle, but could you stretch that out and come back to us?
oh yeah,
Great.
we have data all the way back to
I know you do.
99. I'm sure I can get it all the way through 99.
Thank you.
So to give you an idea of where the sales tax is coming from, which areas, retail trade is obviously the biggest area. It is about 41% of the total sales tax receipts. That number does include vehicle sales and vehicle parts, so it does inflate it a little bit. The next area is accommodation and food service, and then wholesale trade, and those three make up about 69% of the total sales tax.
So these are different than we've shown in the past. In the past, we've shown eating and dining, or eating and drinking, motor vehicle, retail sales. We have changed the way that we are looking at sales tax based on the tax commission. It was really hard. We had a huge pot of non-allocated funds. So we are trying to get better at those funds not being non-allocated and being allocated in categories. In order to do that, we had to change the way that we allocated. So that's why these numbers are different as far as descriptions are concerned. And, you know, motor vehicles now is lumped in with retail instead of broken out separately.
We put together just a few visuals to show you the percentage change in these major areas. In retail trade, this is your month-over-month percentage change. So, you know, anything above 0 is obviously an increase. So even though it might look like it's trending down, that's actually showing you a 3.9% increase over this time last year.
People are still looking. I'm going to
Okay.
pause.
They're still amazed by it.
They're pondering.
Any idea on this retail trade, how much we are losing in internet sales tax if that were to go into effect?
No.
It's hard to get a handle on internet sales tax since it's not reported to us, and the only one that is Amazon at this point. It's hard to get, and you know, we always have to be very cognizant of proprietary information. It's one of the reasons that, you know, we can do things by district, we can do things by block, we can do things percentage of change, but we don't do Costco compared to Sam's Club, right? I would never even give you a percentage of change Costco compared to Sam's Club because it's proprietary information, and we have to be very cognitive of that. And it's just a hard number to attain since we don't know what they're out there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a conversation the Supreme Court's going to be having the end of June, I think. Or is it the end of July? I think it's June, third week of June or so, right after we finish the budget. When we were at ULCT, they had a speaker on that.
So similar graph, this one shows the percentage change in accommodations and food service. This is reflecting a 7.6% increase over this time last year. And just so you know, about 71% of this is actually eating and drinking establishments. So that's the biggest portion of it, is actual dining and drinking.
So we're eating and drinking more.
A lot, yeah.
That's good.
The next one is the third largest area, which is wholesale trade, and that's showing a 6.7% increase over this time last year.
Can you describe wholesale trade more?
Have a description of that?
I'm thinking Costco, but I don't think that's what you mean.
So it is merchant wholesalers of durable goods and non-durable goods, and
So it is
wholesale
Costco.
electronic markets. Those are the three major categories in that.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
again, I wouldn't, be able to disclose names of businesses, but that's what we get.
Okay.
So the next slide is showing you what's happening with parking ticket revenue. For this year, parking ticket revenue is coming in below budget by about $1.2 million. There has been a lot of turnover in the compliance department. They are issuing less tickets than we expected. They do expect to fill those positions and be fully staffed next year, so we're hoping that their budget will come in a little better next year. For next year, the budget is $3.79 million, a reduction of about $150,000. Again, hoping that they'll be fully staffed next year and issuing tickets like usual.
But would it be 40,000 tickets? I mean, that's what 17 to 18 is, right?
Yeah. It's possible if they get fully staffed that they shouldn't have a problem meeting.
We're
meeting
talking
their budget.
40,000 tickets in 1 year.
I know, but we issue 12 to 15,000 a month. So if they get fully staffed, with the 5 officers they're down, it really shouldn't be an issue.
That's
Counsel-
3.5 months.
Council
Of-
members, if we get out of line,
I
I'll
know,
call
I
us in. But
know.
no, I'm just saying, I actually want us to just
Just do it.
do this. Yeah.
Can you explain?
Don't wait for me to call on you. But if I start calling and you know that you're getting out of hand, then I'm going to rein it back in.
Can you explain 17 then?
I mean, 'cause we
the
had
discrepancy
a-
in the number of
we had a
tickets written
fiasco-
and the revenue don't seem to match with the rest of the trend.
Parking
Right.
too.
It's my turn.
You know, what I think happens is there is a bit of a delay, right, between ticket issuance and then collections. But I think we have a full staff of collections people who are always working on this as well. So even though the issuance may be down, there are still people who are working on collecting on a maxed out ticket
Of
versus.
previous year's
Yes,
tickets, so
yeah.
therefore you might see a delay at times, and so
Yeah.
14 doesn't match very well compared to
Right.
15 and
But those revenues will not be in this
16.
parking ticket. It will be actually in the collections object code, not in the parking ticket. So,
Well, after 40 days, yeah.
yeah.
But it looks like we're always really off on what our budget is and what our actual is for tickets. So, why?
Actually inverse.
Yeah, I mean,
It
yeah.
almost looks that way.
When
yeah.
we had really high hopes in 2016, and that, so like, I also don't understand why the budget's going down. Are people parking less? Are we?
Having less complete streets.
So we
Okay.
decreased it based on a bill that was passed.
Oh,
We decreased the revenue for FY19
Oh,
based on a
right.
bill that was passed.
right. But but I still don't understand why there's such a huge gap between, from 2014 until now.
Yeah, it's been, if we go back and look at all of the projections and actuals, it's pretty good, but this one's
This
not
one's,
so
yeah,
good.
really crazy.
is.
So compliance has had difficulties
Okay.
for several years.
8 years,
Oh,
4
okay.
years, 5 years.
At least. If you went back further than 2014, you would see the number of tickets up significantly. We've just, we got Isaac in there. He did a great job. We started getting some decent tickets. He left. I mean, they've just had some issues, right? Director leaves, hire another director, doesn't work out. Compliance staff is, diminished by 8. Now they can't seem to get them hired. So it's just this continual process that they're having difficulties with.
So when I look at the book, I'm on B17, I don't see this as general fund key change.
So that
Where
is
is it?
included in the fines and forfeitures area.
Oh, okay.
And you won't see the reduction there because that also includes justice court fines. So they're kind of lumped together in there.
And we can give you the breakout on that, if you would like that. Okay.
Yeah, I think because I see the parking meter revenue, I would assume I'd see the parking ticket revenue.
Right, yeah, they are lumped under fines.
Yeah, so we'll look for that breakout and follow up
Absolutely.
on that.
So you reminded me of something I'm glad you said, which was the justice court fines. Given Representative King's bill that passed, did we take that into account as we looked at the proposed budget? Because of the mandatory offer of community service in lieu of a
Oh.
fine?
So I don't think they made it mandatory. I believe that the way the bill was written, it says may. And so the courts didn't feel like that was going to change their practice very much.
Hmm.
So that's coming from them, so.
Interesting.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Councilmember Fowler, because we have a memo from Lynn Pace that I'm looking for. Here it is. And I wondered if these are, which is a articulation of all the, apparently I'm missing the first page, all the bills from 2018 with fiscal impacts to the city. It's like 6 pages long or something. And I wondered if these are taken into account in our projections,
They
our
are.
revenue projections.
They are. I will point to HB 336. It's a concern of the administration's. That one won't go into effect until July of 2019. So we will look at that one. There are a few that won't go into effect till July of 19, July of 2020. Most of those are revenue affecting, so we'll have to deal with that in next budget cycle. But
Great.
the ones that affect this year, we have, just like the 154 for parking tickets, that one, we have made an adjustment inside the budget.
That is quick work. I really appreciate that. That's fantastically sensitive. I think to Councilmember Wharton's point, can we just be much more conservative in our parking ticket revenue projections, even with the hopeful hiring back of the staff? Let's discontinue this separation between projected and actual.
Okay.
And so, if we did, how do you suggest then aligning? Is the projection we're looking at here?
For this year, the projection you're looking at is
Well,
$2.7 million, but I think next year, if you wanted to truly align it, you're looking at,
Mary Beth, will you speak into that
I'm
mic?
sorry, I'm looking at the graph. We'll have to come back with a number, but I suspect around $1 million.
Did you say $1 million?
That's what it looks like.
So instead of, when combined within fines and forfeitures, instead of being in the positive at 52,000, we should look at being in the negative
Correct.
by $1 million-ish. Okay,
That's off the
there's
cuff.
item one.
That's off the cuff. We'll come, like I said, we'll do some more analysis and
Thanks.
come back with a realistic number.
Okay.
Correct.
2019.
Amy, will you put your mic on?
Sorry, based on both 336 and whatever Representative King's bill is. So I would just, that might be a next year problem, but I would,
So we've evaluated 336.
Yeah.
We were on top of it the entire time. It switched on the floor. So it was a justice court bill, and they changed it on the floor and adopted it on the floor the same night they did the inland port.
yes. Yay for us. Okay,
Okay?
thank,
Just so you know, though, the Justice Court never charged more than 25% for late fees. So on SB 336, they don't feel it's really going to affect them. It'll affect their collection agency, the OSTC. They'll probably take a revenue hit for that, but it certainly does affect civil citations.
and I happen to know a bunch of public defenders that, based on Representative King's bill, are going to be pushing for that as they should as community service. And so I just keep it in our heads as part of a potential loss, right?
So we can go back to the Justice Court, re-ask the question, and see if they can come up with some estimates, worst-case scenario, to bring to the council.
Thanks.
Okay?
Okay, so moving on to building permits. This also shows a scary dip, but this one actually has a better explanation. It's a result of airport permits that are dropping off now that their construction is getting completed. So we budgeted about 1.7 million from the airport in FY18, and now that's declined to about 200,000. So other than that, permits are stable. Okay. So just to touch on a few of the items from the key changes. These are a couple of the new revenue sources that we are proposing in the budget. We have a new growth estimate in real property tax of $1.5 million. There is a transfer from the RDA in the budget of $1.4 million. That is a one-time transfer, mostly for homeless services. There's a judgment levy in the budget of $2.6 million. The other thing, it's a small amount, but just wanted to point it out to you because you'll be receiving an ordinance for new solar panel fees on the CFS. Previously, we based this solar panel fee as it was a permit, it was based on project value. So we did a cost analysis and have changed the way we charge for those. It's now based on the kilowatts generated by the panels. So it was a revenue source of about 487,000. The new fee structure will make it about a $209,000 revenue source. So that loss will be made up by a transfer from sustainability. So it's kind of a neutral for the general fund. Any questions on those?
I do, actually. Could you go back? On the RDA coverage of the homeless services, can anybody remind me of how we arrived at the RDA covering the homeless services? Jennifer?
It's a new proposal in this budget, so this is the first time it's ever been done. It was recently, the state law was changed, I think 2 years ago, to allow for RDA increment to be spent on homeless services. So this is a new thing.
But we could, come on up, David, conceivably, we could take new growth money to pay for that. We could take any other revenue stream to pay for that.
Just one minor correction. I believe that we also use some RDA funding as a part of our initial commitment to Operation Rio Grande in the November budget amendment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So for homeless services as well, but it's
That
based
was a
off.
one-time.
Yes, but it's based off of the changes to the state statute that allows the RDA dollars for homeless services.
This will also be one-time expenditures, one-time revenue.
So I just want to note for my peers that I want us to have I hope we have a discussion about this, a robust discussion, because I'm not against it at this point, but I think we need to talk about this. There's state statute that we've just dug into in our meeting a couple hours ago around minimum allocations for housing and how we've gone above and beyond that in some cases for some areas, going up to 20% allocation. So I think there's context for us to discuss where we make our allocation to homeless services from, and whether it's all from the RDA or part from the RDA. I hope we have that discussion.
I agree wholeheartedly, Madam Chair, and I think for me, the first thing that comes up is how are we, what is the definition of homeless services? What is included in there? What is that $1.4 million paying for? I feel it seems vague, but maybe it's somewhere out there and I just haven't gotten to that point in the budget book yet. But I agree that some of this I need more clarification on this and that discussion. And to go along with it more probably for next year, policy of these, if we did a one-time transfer last year from RDA and a one-time transfer this year from RDA, are we going to expect a one-time transfer next year from RDA? And what's the policy around all of that?
So I think we'll get to those separate items under the, what is all under homeless services in the CAN part of our budget, which I think is next week.
And when we tied it to specific expenditure line items. So RDA, this money was tied, it's actually $1.2 million of revenue. The other amount is for staffing. So 197,000 of it for staffing, 1.2 million of it is for homeless services, and we actually identified specifically all of the information in CAN and how it relates to RDA.
Great. Thanks.
And we provided that schedule in the key changes, but if we need to resend that, we can.
So is that in addition to 2.4 million from the general fund, or is that including this transfer over to the general fund? Then we did 2.4 last year, and is that continuing this year, and this is in addition to that, or is this part of that?
This is, no, we didn't do any money from RDA. We only did.
Not from RDA, but from general fund. Did the RDA money go into general fund, and then general fund was allocated to these services?
Correct.
Is that accurate?
That's correct.
So the 2.4, say from last year, if this continued this year, part of that from RDA was transferred?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
So 2.4 is probably the total amount, but part of it came from RDA.
Correct, $1,025,000 came from RDA and BA1.
But the statement is this is one-time revenue and one-time expense.
Correct,
So it's allocated in the budget that way, so we'd know it.
correct.
Okay.
Because it's all based on Operation Rio Grande expenditures.
Okay.
And I think the caution that our staff would just, to put it out there, is that Operation Rio Grande, while intended to be a one-time exercise, is continuing and continuing for
Sure.
good reason. And so I think that it's not easy to say that there will be a hard end to Operation Rio Grande come June 30th of this next fiscal
Sure.
year. And so just knowing that that's out there as a potential need to continue some of those services, might not be totally wrapped up by then.
Yeah, I think that the policy discussion for me is that if it's identified as one time in the budget, it's helpful to know that so that we can be clear in how we're doing this. But I think going forward, if we do intend to continue to do some homeless services from this budget, we do need a different way to do it. That's why I'm advocating for the CDBG or ESG sort of model and how we do that, so.
I'm
If,
grateful for this, and in looking to our discussion next Tuesday, we will make sure to shape the discussion so we can go deeper here, okay? Okay.
So just a few more notable changes. These will be listed on the key changes, so you can refer to them. But as I mentioned in the previous slide, we did put a $3.8 million increase for sales tax in the budget. There is an increase to our admin fees. This is mostly due to salary adjustments, so we try to recoup our costs of those. You'll also see a decrease in the RDA tax increment transfer. It's kind of a pass-through. There's a direct offset in expenses for that. We have in the budget an increase in the transfer from the E911 fund. That's also to cover salaries for those employees. The other thing that I wanted to bring your attention to is this decrease that we've put in the budget for franchise taxes. It's a $1.6 million decrease, and we're responding to what we're seeing as a trend, actually nationwide trend for this tax. We continue to study it. We're not exactly sure what's causing it, although the way the cell phone companies are charging for data and for phones now, they've really changed that. So we're continuing to watch that, but I just wanted to point out that decrease to you.
Can I ask a dumb question because I'm new and it doesn't really even have, it's only $100,000, but I'm curious. There's, on page B17, and I wrote this everywhere in the budget that says this word. What's miscellaneous revenue? What does that include?
So miscellaneous revenue can include, it's a big major category. It can include, it includes our BABS bond. So it's a bond that we took out. That bond will be going away.
Building America bonds.
Thanks.
Right. That bond will be going away. Those bonds, we're going to actually redo those bonds in the next year or two, so that revenue will be going away. It is collections revenue is in miscellaneous revenues. It could be, it's anything besides your taxes, your fees, and your charges for services. So anything else that you can possibly think of that doesn't include in charges for fees and services. So, recreation stuff, that's in its own major category. Taxes are in their own major category, including sales tax, property tax, franchise taxes. Intergovernmental is in its own category. So miscellaneous is kind of everything else. It's the entire kitchen sink, excluding all those other major categories.
Okay, I was just curious.
I don't know how to make it show up there, though.
That's all for me.
can I ask a question on the handout, on the revenues handout?
That one's coming.
That's John's. He's
Yeah,
on
all
his own.
right. I'll wait for you
You
then.
can ask
So
it
now
when we get
so
there.
now we'll do the
Yes.
budget overview. You gonna run for him?
You can just hand me the map.
All right, first, I just want to thank you for letting us come and talk to you a little bit about the budget. As you are aware, lots of time and effort goes into coming to you with a balanced budget, and I just want to thank all of the people within the administration who put forth a lot of time and effort to be able to put a book together like the budget book that you're looking at today. So grateful for all of their work. I do have to say, every year we come and we begin our budget meetings, and I wonder how we will ever get a balanced budget. And every year we make it. And so I kudos to all of the people that work, because they really do put forth a lot of time and effort and come up with ideas that allow us to be able to come up with a balanced budget. So just want to thank everyone that participates in the budget process. Some slides. Big picture. The mayor's recommended budget is $1.29 billion. Now, that includes all of the funds, not just the general fund. Obviously, the biggest portion of the budget would be the airport fund. Public utilities fund is also a very large one. And then the general fund. General fund is, if I can read my numbers, about 365 million. No, it's not that high. 300 million in the current year. So I got some glasses, I'll put them on. How's that? So, okay. As far as it goes, we always begin by talking about revenues, just like Lisa did this year. In our presentation here, that's where we start. We try to figure out where we're at. We don't want to budget for stuff that we can't pay for. So we start, figure out where we're at, and then go from there. This year we saw just a minimal increase within the general fund. This slide that you're looking at is the general fund revenues, and there really is a small increase within the general fund, with the exception of the $25 million. So as you look at the FY19 MRB, you can see the gray block on the top representing the $25 million from the sales tax increase. But the budget from year 18 to 19 really only represented about a $2.7 million increase, or 1%. That 1% had a lot of people asking for it and a lot of projects asking for it. And so as we went through it, we tried to identify what the priorities were. The mayor listed out what her priorities were. Those were taking care of the employees, and then also we wanted to cover the funding our future, covering transit, safer neighborhoods, infrastructure, and housing. As we go into the budget, we talk to each of the departments and ask them for different things. One of the things that we wanted, that we did this year, was we asked each of the departments to present their 3 top needs within their budget. And so the departments came to us with those needs. We also asked them to come with some cuts. The needs were $23 million worth. The cuts weren't quite that significant. So we began, with all of those needs. The mayor really did recognize that her biggest priority was working with the employees to give some salary increases. And so many of the cuts didn't actually happen. Go back one slide, I think, real fast. So as we focus our attention on the general funds budget, you can see that most places really look similar to where they were last year in this graph. The biggest differences that you see are within the police department, public services, and within non-departmental. Those increases include the $25 million for the sales tax, and that's where the increases truly do come from. So, okay. As I mentioned, the biggest increase that the mayor proposed within our budget, outside of funding our future, was was an increase in compensation. We had a 7% increase in the cost of health insurance that the city is seeing. That results in about $1.3 million increase to the general fund and a $2.1 million increase to the total citywide budget. The mayor also included, going forward, again, the contribution to the HSA, the upfront contribution to the HSA for both single, double, and family coverage. The mayor's budget proposes to honor all of the negotiated contracts increases that are built into the labor negotiations with each of the labor unions. So meeting all of those obligations, and then the budget has a placeholder for $3 million, for a 3%, not a 3 million, a 3% increase within those bargaining units, and then a 3% increase for all non-represented employees. Currently, labor negotiations are underway with each of the bargaining units, and we set aside money, and then they get to go back and forth on how they budget that amount. So, questions? I'll take that as a no. Comments?
Any comments? I have a comment.
Okay.
Seems difficult to negotiate when you come to the table saying, here's what there is. The negotiation is then how do you divide it, not how much is there. And the council had asked the administration to start the negotiation process well before the budget process. Like in January, I think, was what the conversation that we'd had last year. So it doesn't sound like that's what happened this time. And I know that this right now isn't a discussion about union negotiations, but it perks my ears up to hear that. So we'll come back, we can come back to this.
And I can say that that's certainly a concern that the administration had, as well as from what we're hearing from the unions. And one of the things that the mayor has done within her budget is she has budgeted for a new position, a labor negotiator, and so that position is within the mayor's recommended budget that you're seeing today. So while we didn't really fix the problem this year, we hope to have fixed the problem going forward.
I'll say that's a year late. This is not good. This is not what we asked for.
We didn't have a negotiator? Is that what I'm hearing?
Third-party negotiator, it sounds like, is,
It will actually be a physical person, yeah, an employee, physical
I should
person.
hope so.
But employed by the
Tired.
Employed by the city,
You can have
yes.
virtual person, this is a physical person. No, it's an employee.
Employed by the city as a
Madam
full-time
Chair.
employee?
Right, as a full-time
I
employee.
guess my question is, why does it need to go outside of the attorney's office? When that's something that's been done for how long?
our city
125
attorney would
years.
like to comment on whether or
Well,
not she appreciates the opportunity to negotiate our labor contracts.
So over the last 20 years, I would say the negotiator has changed. It was the HR director for a number of years. It has also lived in the attorney's office for most of probably the last 15 years. We were not involved very much last year. We are very much involved in the fire contract negotiations this year at the request of the administration. So we could certainly have a policy discussion with Patrick when he's here about different ways to manage it. You'll have an opportunity to speak with HR about their proposal, because their budget does include a full-time employee who may go back to the model that was probably before 20 years ago, when we had a labor relations officer who was a city employee. And we've often talked about this, and you've heard me say this before, as a three-legged stool. You need a negotiator, you need a contract administrator, and then you need a policymaker. And for a long time, we've been operating with a two-legged stool, because we really haven't had that sort of, you've had the negotiator and the administrator often living on the fifth floor, and that creates its own set of tensions. But again, that's a policy discussion that we're happy to have.
Okay, so I was just asking, when we get to really dig into this in the HR, May 22nd,
There's also compensation next week.
and compensation next week.
May I ask
Sure.
that we also, sort of during that discussion, talk about the process as well? I know that it would, I know that there's a process by which in other municipalities, it is late, Mary Beth, and we're all tired, but that union representatives have the opportunity to give written and verbal comment to the council and to their councils. And I think maybe as part of some of this discussion, again, not this year, but as we move forward, looking at the process by which this is going, and if there's ways to improve it from a communication standpoint so that everybody feels heard. But again, that may be something that we talk about, even not within the budget right now, but we come back to. I would like to come back to as a policy discussion at some point, so if we can put that on the checklist, reminder list.
Okay.
Thank you.
I had a couple questions, if that's all right. Not on this topic. Looking at the revenue slide, it looks, I could be wrong about this, but you got 5 areas that sort of hold most of the revenue fairly, I don't say equally, but it's fairly good. It's fairly balanced. Is that accurate to say? And compared to other cities this size, is that fairly balanced as well?
There's usually 3:
There's usually 3, yeah.
property, sales, franchise. Those 3 make up about 70 to 72% of your revenues.
Yeah.
So yes, that is the majority of your revenues, and then the rest of it is business license, permits, fees. And then the others are just small dollars. Now, you do have, transfers from other funds and interfund, intergovernmental, what I would call not real revenues, right? They're coming from other funds, but they're not true revenues that we're actually receiving physically in. So I don't look at that as a huge revenue source. That's why I look at property sales and franchise as your 3 major.
Okay. That's pretty typical for cities this size.
It is, especially in Utah. I think in Utah, state statute governs what we can charge pretty tightly. So fees you have to cost justify, and some fees you can't even charge. So everything is governed by state statute tightly, and so those 3, especially in Utah, are the 3 largest.
Okay.
And in other states, I believe property tax is probably a lot larger than sales tax is. Here, it's pretty equal, right? Property tax and sales tax are pretty equal as far as revenue generating.
Okay.
And then I just have a little context on that. And while in our city, property and sales tax are pretty equal, doing an analysis sort of before the 2009 crash, most other cities in Utah didn't exceed 20% property tax. And so, we're at like a third property and sales. Since the crash, cities that relied too heavily on sales tax realized that they couldn't fund their ongoing needs, and so a lot had to increase property taxes right around there because it is the predictable revenue source. So I think Salt Lake City's been well positioned just in having that sort of diversified portfolio and kind of continuing that practice of always, being mindful of not having too high property taxes, but not putting too much of a burden on just sales tax to fund those things. So.
Yeah, it was nice because I know nationally it's about 70% consumer essentially revenue for governments. The second question I had was excluding the supplemental sales tax increase we're having this year, the 25 million projecting. Is revenue essentially flat, or what's the increase?
Correct.
Essentially flat?
$2.7 million increase. It's 1%.
1%.
Yep.
And historically, how does that rank in the last, say, 20 years?
Last year, we put 12 million to it. That's the difference. The difference is that we have given you almost every single fee we possibly can think of in order to charge, in order to generate more revenue. And because of state statute and the hindrances there, we are limited to what we charge. So last year, we came with some new fees. Stabilization came into play last year. Sales tax increased quite a bit last year. So we could diversify that, and this year, property tax is only coming in $400,000 above budget. didn't feel like we could come to the council with a stabilization recommendation. Didn't feel it was justified. You know, sales tax, we did come with $3.8 million. That's a significant increase. That's your only big increase inside this budget. But it's because we are running out of options.
I think it's an important point on a number of levels, but it's not very well known publicly. We seem to think that growth brings all sorts of revenue in, and yet there's a disconnect right now. And especially if we're looking at our budget this year and going forward, the projections are not rosy at all. So,
And I think that what is often not recognized is that, you know, people do pay more in property taxes when you have a new building going up or new apartments, but all of the other revenue categories that finance just went through are things that the council can't control necessarily. We can't force people to get parking tickets, and we can't, you know, force building permits to be paid for that aren't there. And so to a certain extent, we're at the mercy a little bit of those revenue categories, and they can offset what is otherwise a really robust economy.
And all it takes is something small, right? I mean, parking is, you know, $1.5 million. And to the total budget, that's small, but it's $1.5 million. So it's significant when you start adding a small sales tax at 3.8, 1.5 takes half of that.
Okay, we're only an hour behind schedule, so let's just keep moving quickly.
Hey,
Thanks.
just to cover a few of the, this slide just talks about a few of the increases that you will see within the budget. Trails and Public Lands received some one-time funding. That is some of the funding that is coming from the RDA for Operation Rio Grande's second year coverage for Trails and Public Lands cleanups. Governmental immunity, we are self-insured, and so we had to budget, or got to budget, a little bit of an increase towards governmental immunity. Interest costs continue to rise with the changes in interest rates, so our interest expense increased. We did see interest revenue increase as well, just as a note. The budget also includes a change in the way we are budgeting for the Salt Lake Arts Council. There is a one-time change of $90,000, slightly different. I think it's $91,000 to be able to transition the Arts Council out from under the purview of the city and to make them a true 501c9. And then there's also an increase of $30,000 in grants for the Arts Council. And just a note that we did change the way we looked at the capital improvement program to truly make it a program. And that was a change to where we talk specifically about debt service. And then, so we broke it down into 3 different areas, and those areas were debt service, ongoing maintenance of capital assets, and then new projects within the capital improvement program. And then last slide that I have, I think, I actually have 2 slides on funding our future, just really quickly. As we looked at funding our future, you know, we have brought to you what you will see is a balanced budget within that $25 million. And that, you know, meets the combined goals of the mayor and the council to fund transit, safer neighborhoods, infrastructure, and housing. And then just quickly flip to our last slide, which is the spreadsheet of the funding our future and the breakout of those funds. We did set aside 10% of the funding our future anticipated revenues this year to build fund balance for that and maintain our 10% fund balance required. So.
You want to do it, or I'll do it?
Go ahead.
I think that we're probably going to want to keep looking at ways to increase above the 10% over the next 6 weeks.
Here.
5 weeks.
Over the next 5 or 6 weeks.
So where does this leave us as projected for our fund balance this year?
So John and I just completed fund balance that'll be coming with BA5, and it's at 11.31%. Now, remember that we probably have some significant savings coming back from BA1 that was adopted with Rio Grande because staffing hasn't, people haven't been hired. So that will drop to fund balance and come back into fund balance as well. That's tough to predict. You know, I've been thinking about this, and I have some suggestions on where I think that is a good place for us to take it from and save. Example would be the property tax, right? We're $400,000 above budget in property tax. Maybe we take that whole $400,000 and you stick it in your fund balance, right? Anything above your budget in property tax, up to a certain percentage, you put into fund balance.
Are we not allowed to bring more than 10% into fund balance as a policy?
Bring up to 25% into
That's a
fund
policy
balance.
we can change if we'd like to.
10% your minimum, that's an ordinance.
Mhm.
25% is state statute.
Okay.
5% is state statute. So you can go to 5% or up to 25%.
Okay.
No,
You'll say no at the low end, and I'll say no at the high end.
I would
We'll
love,
meet somewhere.
I would love to have 25%,
I know you would.
but I don't ever see Salt Lake City getting to 25%. But, you know, 15 to 18 is where I always, is my happy place.
So, council members, I just want to point out regarding this slide that on B6, actually B5, 6, and 7, there's some breakouts of these numbers, and on the housing portion of it, it ties units per year for those dollars and the AMI targeted, and that's pretty cool information to have lined up with the dollars. So, just so you know.
Other questions? We'll be back over the next
So
couple of
many
months.
questions. Yeah.
We'll be back over the next couple of months.
Okay.
We look forward to your
Thank
questions.
you.
So,
Thank you, thank you. Council members, I think that we need to take our dinner break right now, or we're not going to get one. I think that we need to probably skip, unfortunately, our opportunity to hear from our staff on the budget overview. Unless you guys want to come back to that council staff budget overview discussion at the end of our agenda. Because we've got the water district kind of time sensitive at 7. I want us to eat dinner, and then we've got these 2 small wireless so that we can let those folks go home. Do you want to come back to this?
I say we bump it.
Okay, well then, if we're gonna bump it, I just wanna put a bee in your bonnet about golf. 'Cause why not start right now? That, we don't have any proposal to change golf this year. And last year, we allocated about $450,000 out of the general fund against our previous promises that we wouldn't do that, as a conditional appropriation that the administration would go to RFI for outside management. Ideas, opportunities.
Questions, just other scenarios.
Right. My understanding is that has happened. We have responses, and we have no recommendation from the administration of those responses. So we have another general fund budget request for operations for golf, $500,000 range.
Not for operations?
200 and something.
No, it's 430,000, it's for the ESCO. So it's
There's
debt
2
service.
separate ones.
No, the other one is the $181,000, is that what you're talking about?
No, I think there may be an accounting lingo discrepancy here, so maybe what I'll focus on, it's the deficit in the Golf Enterprise Fund that's not sustainable.
Correct.
So there's a,
And there was a line item in the budget book that listed a transfer of 210 for, into the debt service for golf equipment.
apparatus, yeah.
That is for fire SCBA's. Last year, we allocated some funding to fire department to maintain their
We
SCBA's.
can get into that, but not tonight. Thank you, John.
That one
Golf
is
is scheduled next week.
not.
What I want to say, council members, is I think we got a problem here. And we'll dig into it more. I won't make any golf puns tonight, but I hope that my peers start looking at the proposal and thinking about what on earth we're going to do here, because the intention, I believe, and James and Andrew were here last year when we set that contingent appropriation, was that we would have answers that we could make decisions based off of for this year's budget. We don't have solutions being presented to us, and we're being asked to continue funding this enterprise fund out of the general fund.
Madam Chair, just to highlight that there were options brought back, but they didn't coincide with the policy that was set forth by this body. So there were things that came forward that the administration provided, but none of it coincided with the policy discussions that we have had regarding the Gulf Enterprise Fund.
You're talking about the RFI responses.
Well, we had, I forget his name, he's since left. Yeah, Dan Dent. He came with ideas, but really, I mean, some of them were out-of-the-box ideas, but none of them related to any of the policy
But that's
discussion.
different
I know.
than the
But I'm just saying that
RFIs.
if it ever comes back that, you know, well, the administration did give us ideas. Well, those ideas did not fall under the policy direction that we set.
But in my memory, that was a separate discussion from the RFI discussion. So we made that contingent appropriation based on the RFIs, not on
Right.
Dan Dent's concepts.
Correct.
And those RFIs are in the building, and they're not in the council office.
Correct.
That's my problem. Just to plant a seed. Okay, thank you, Lisa, John, and Mary Beth. We'll have many more fun discussions. We're going to take a dinner break and start promptly at 6:30 with our city policy and state law for small cell wireless technology. Thanks. All right, welcome back. We've got 4 council members, so we're just going to jump in here and give a shout out to James and Andrew, wherever you are. Oh, I mean, James is here. Sorry, Andrew. Thank you. James, you're, you're so slight. We'll get back to item A5, the small cell wireless technology, city policy and state law, and have Ben Ludke and Kira Luke, I don't know if you want to come up, and give us some introduction, if you would, Ben. I know Kimberly Chitris is, you're welcome to come up if you'd like to, and Dan Rip. Thank you.
So there are 2 related items on the council agenda. The first one is an informational transmittal, and the second is a request for a master license agreement for a private vendor. And there's one staff report that relates to both of these. And I've got a short intro, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dan, who has a PowerPoint to walk the council through. The master license agreement does not require a public hearing to adopt, and it can be added to the May 15th council agenda for potential action. The new technology that is going to be discussed is called small cell wireless facilities, and the intent is to add capacity and coverage on a wireless network. This fills in some of the holes and adds additional capacity for telecommunication networks, and it's often used in areas with high density, and that it's often used in areas with high density such as the downtown. And I'm sure you've heard of 5G, the 5th generation wireless technology. This is part of the backbone of that next generation. The small cell wireless facilities are installed in the public right of way, and recent changes to state law, SB 189, will allow these to be installed on pretty much any structures in the public right of way. So street signs, street lights, utility poles, monopoles, new poles just for this. Federal and state law means that these telecommunication providers have the right to install their small cell facilities in the public right of way, but the city does have limited space to control the design. The administration is recommending a master license agreement process. The city does not currently have a process or a governing ordinance to regulate small cell wireless technology. The master license agreement is similar to franchise agreements that have come before the council before, in that once a vendor is given a master license agreement, they would still need to obtain a permit for each location that has a small cell wireless facility installed. The specific agreement with XNet is for a term of 5 years, and it would automatically renew for a second 5-year term. And this is the first master license agreement for small cell facilities coming before the council, but we understand negotiations are ongoing with 4 more vendors, so that we may see more of these later this calendar year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dan for a presentation.
Great, thank you. Ben, that was it, so are we done?
Moving on.
Right?
Dan, can I ask, before we move on from Ben, in case you aren't going to address this, to give us a snapshot of the impetus that led the state to making this far-reaching decision?
Sure. So we have been working, and I say we, many city departments, many individuals have come together to collaborate to try to figure this out. We've known for a couple of years that this small cell technology is coming to Salt Lake City, and so that has been the driving force behind this, and we've spent a lot of time trying to formulate a way to integrate it into current policy that we have and current ordinances, and so that's what brings us here tonight.
No, thank you, but that's not what I meant.
Oh, okay.
Let me try
Sorry.
to be more clear. I don't have the language to describe the 3G and the other technologies that we currently franchise with, which I'm sure you do. It seems as though we're reaching a limitation of bandwidth or something that has led to new technologies being developed based on our ever-expanding function as a society on wireless networks. And is that
Yes.
what led to this
Yes.
development? Why aren't we seeing more towers like we know? And will those begin to decline, or will we see that continue to grow?
Sure, I'm glad you asked, because that's a great transition into my presentation. So I want to give a policy, or a technology overview of what small cell is, and then I want to just take a few minutes to talk about a process and how we want to implement that into the city and our existing city policy and the forthcoming legislation that we're hoping to go through a little bit tonight as well. But let me just start by showing you, or giving you just a quick overview of what a small cell company is. The FCC has classified telecommunication, or have classified these small cell providers as telecommunications providers. And these companies have requested installations on third-party utility poles, city-owned streetlights, traffic poles, and they also want to install monopoles. And the participants in the small cell market, at least in Salt Lake City, include Extenet, Crown Castle, Verizon, and Mobility. And each of those companies have representatives here tonight in the audience. So what the small cell is we're all familiar with the big cell phone tower, or the cell towers that we see throughout the city, and they emit a macro amount of transmission that we're able to use our wireless internets and our cell phones and the technology that we're used to. And it's sort of an umbrella that exists over the city. But where there is a higher concentration of density, that macro site is not able to keep up with the capacity that happens in areas where there's more population. So in downtown Salt Lake, or around sports arenas, or wherever there's a high concentration of people. And so with this new technology that's coming in, and Ben said it well when he talked about it being the backbone, that's really what this is, because it's a micro cell, or a small cell that exists underneath that umbrella that will help to absorb the demand that exists in these higher population or populated areas. So it really exists underneath that umbrella of the macro cell.
I'm just going to add, part of this is due to the increase in demand for downloading data. So that is growing exponentially. And so the small cells are to address that capacity or that coverage sometimes in the density. But also as they move to 5G, which is the next technology, 5G is dependent entirely on small cell. So the towers will still exist, the macro sites, but most of the new technology as the industries are building out their networks are going to be based on this small cell concept.
So, thanks. We'll go to Councilmember Rogers, but I just wanted to ask that in hearing about the need for these, particularly in urban areas with high density and new technologies being built on small cell technology, how does that work when you take a device with new small cell based technology into a rural setting? And are they adaptive between macro sites, satellites, small cell?
Sure. Great question. I don't know that I have the answer to that specifically, and maybe at some point if someone from one of the companies would want to address that. But I think that it's adaptable, and it could be adaptable in that scenario.
It's okay. We can just get information later.
As we go.
Councilmember Rogers?
Yes, in researching this, I understand that there's a lot of different sizes of these small cells. And in looking at that, I know that some of them have been installed on the base of a light pole. How do we make sure that it doesn't encroach on ADA compliance in the city? Or how do we make sure that these are actually aesthetically pleasing in downtown Salt Lake with the poles that we have, or in how they're looking at installing these? I mean, is there some sort of design guideline that we can look at and making sure that it's appealing to Salt Lake City? That's my first question.
Okay.
My second question is, was Greg Daly involved with this as CIO? Because he has some really great ideas for looking for us to become a technology city, and that's in providing, wireless internet throughout the city, and, it kicks you off at a certain time. But is that something that he's been brought into the loop on to see if we could use in lieu of payment, that we have wireless throughout the city for residents. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and so to answer your question, I haven't worked directly with Greg, but certainly I'm sure that's a resource that we'd want to look at, and so we'll definitely reach out to make sure that that's covered and that we have that conversation with him. As far as the...
Just a moment, Dan, just
Sure.
for you to put on an upcoming opportunity, we'll have Director Daly with us for the IT budget sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks, so let's flag that as an item we can bring up with him
Yeah,
then.
I know that when he first came on, it was big for him to talk about a technology
Right.
city, and, you know, before these are
Right.
executed, I'd love to get his input and what he could.
Good
So
idea.
these are a little bit different though than like a smart city
Right.
concept. These are for the carriers to serve their customers.
Right?
So as far as the aesthetics go, that's actually the very next slide. And so let's talk a little bit about what the equipment looks like and the size and how we plan to bring these into the city and attach them, you know, where these providers want to attach them. So there are 4 different components to the small cell location. The first one is the antenna itself, and that ranges in size, but overall and over time, at least in the last couple of years that we've been looking at this, the size of the antenna is getting smaller, which is good news. The second component is the radio itself, and that's usually contained within some kind of box that's attached to the pole. And then there's also the power that runs to the pole. And in most cases, if it is a pole, the power runs on the inside of the pole where it can, if it's a hollow core type structure. If it's a wood pole, like we have throughout the city, then those type of wires are attached to the pole itself. And then there's also the backhaul, which is the trenching that takes place in the right-of-way that brings the fiber optics and the cabling and the power to the pole itself. So those are the 4 different components. And as you can see, this pole that's on the slide, it's a little bit difficult to see the actual body of the pole, but at the top you can see the antenna itself, and that's very typical in size and what that would look like. And then as you run down the pole, you'll see the different boxes that are attached that have the different components to it. So this pole itself looks really good, and these are pictures that were provided to us through different providers and what they're doing in similar markets around the United States. Another example.
Thank Verizon. I think
Yes,
we can thank
thanks.
Verizon for these couple.
Verizon did provide these pictures for us. Here's another example of a light pole that shows that it could show up. They've replicated a decorative pole in the city that this is located in. And one thing that I wanted to emphasize is the base of the pole is where a lot of the components reside. So they've done a good job in this example of containing that within the base of the pole itself. And then there's also a lot of different design options based on the type of poles that we have. And we have a lot of these similar poles, but we also have our decorative light poles that are downtown. That is something we want to be very thoughtful about, and how that's all going to take place. So does that give you a general idea, Councilman Rogers?
Well, I mean, it does, but it doesn't solve my dilemma of what are these going to look like on our decorative poles downtown Salt Lake City.
Sure.
I think that's part of the process that we need to work through is creating design guidelines, and that's one of the places where the city still has some discretion or authority under the new state law.
Yeah, and I think that that's important for us as well as to, on the solid pole, you know, if it's a telephone pole, is to figure that out.
Right.
Sure.
And I think that the providers that we're talking to are all committed to making these aesthetically pleasing in the city. I think you can find plenty of examples online where that didn't happen.
Right.
But
Oh, yeah.
we're hoping for great partnerships.
Okay.
And as we talk more about the process itself, I think we can really focus in on some things that we can do and levers that we may have that would help us to get through that process and make sure that is what the city wants.
So can we expect a follow-up report from you all farther into those conversations with regard to our unique lighting fixtures in the city?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
So just quickly, let's talk a little bit about how it's currently set up in the city with city ordinance, or excuse me, let me back up. Let me just talk about a few of the mechanisms that we already have in place that helps us regulate telecom activity within the city. First one is the franchise agreement, which you're all familiar with. You've passed several of those over time. This is a very broad grant of access that allows telecom providers whose end user are the consumers to come in and access the right-of-way as needed to provide that service for their consumers. The next, and this, by the way, is a permit, or excuse me, it's an agreement that's adopted by ordinance and approved by the city council. And then the other two are more of an administrative process, that being of the telecom right-of-way permit, which allows for more of a specific area to have conduit put in the right-of-way. And that permit is done through Real Estate Services, and we offer that. And those are usually conduit that's used to tether different buildings together. So the LDS headquarters, where they're networking buildings together, or campuses out in the International Center where they're trying to just, bring together different buildings and tie them in through a network. And then finally, we have our encroachment right-of-way permit that is very specific to different types of encroachments that are in the right-of-way. The current city code allows for wireless infrastructure that's known as the video services systems. So this would include any type of antenna that would emit a transmission of digital signals, and that's covered in our ordinance, although it is a little bit outdated. And then our zoning allows for antennas to only be located on third-party owned utility poles, and they also allow for electrical boxes and antennas to be in the right-of-way, but they must be subsurface in a vault. So we don't allow for a ground-mounted utility box. Then, in this year's legislative session, the SB 189 Small Wireless Facilities Deployment Act was proposed and passed, and that has changed the landscape of this entire conversation. And so I want to just give you a really high-level overview of that bill. And it basically mandates the installation of small cell on any city-owned infrastructure, including streetlights, street signs, and traffic poles, as well as to allow for the installation of monopoles. It's also mandated the compensation to the city and has given us certain guidelines that we have to follow, and it also mandates what our application and our permit fees can be for those. So in light of that and the work that we had done prior to the bill coming together, we put together a 2-agreement structure that would allow the providers to come in and get the grant of access, and then also the permits that they needed to attach to what's currently allowed in city code to attach their infrastructure. And that included the master license agreement. It's very similar to the franchise agreement that you're familiar with. We named it the master license agreement just because it is more specific to small cell technology. And then coupled with that would be any type of right-of-way permit application that was brought into the city and run through our system, through engineering and the different city departments to get the actual attachment permits for those. This process structure is 2-step, like I just said, just with the first step being the master license agreement that would come and be approved by the city council, and then the permit application that would follow, actually getting individual permits. We anticipate that the city will be flooded with permit applications in the very near future. And the state legislation has also put limits on that so that we're not completely overwhelmed by it. They're allowing for 25 facilities to be in each application, and then also allowing for a consolidated application where they're able to do 25 facilities within 30 days. So we're hoping that that kind of controls the volume that comes in. And then we want to quickly implement that into our existing process structure. It's a wheel and a spoke structure where all of the city departments that would have input on that would be able to give their approval, and with having one permit coordinator that would run all of that just to make it as efficient as possible. So where we're at today is we do have the first master license agreement that has been transmitted, as Ben had said. The SB 189 bill will become effective on September 1st of this year, which is in 4 very short months. And right now we are putting together a team to contemplate some design standards to be able to put those into place so that we have that ready to go in the very near future. And then we also want to propose language for a small cell facility ordinance. And that's what we anticipate to happen next. And so with that, are there any questions I can answer, we can answer for you?
And again, we're lumping items 5 and 6 together right
Correct,
now,
yeah.
council members. Well, Ben, and Kira, there's excellent policy questions in these items for us. Council members, you want to dive in? Councilmember Rogers' question around Director Daley's part in the conversation, I think kind of bleeds into the 8th policy question around digital inclusion. For me, I'm not sure if you were going there though, James. I'm curious about the MLA language around the company being able to trim our trees with the approval and direction of the urban forester. And I'm curious about that because, for years I've been trying to get enough money to let the urban forestry department function and at least plant more trees than we rip out every year. And it's an ongoing push to have sufficient funding for that division. With the amount of permit applications and the amount of potential sites, this makes me concerned about the forestry division's capacity to truly oversee all of the potential intersections of the companies with our 20% of our urban forest that is in the public right-of-way. So have we talked yet with Tony Glyott and about their capacity?
Sure, and so one of the things to keep in mind with the small cell is that thankfully they're not going to be able to attach to trees, but with their attachment to poles, there already is going to be certain standards and best practices that they follow to make sure that the trees don't interfere with the poles themselves. So they don't really anticipate that there's going to be a huge influx in demand for tree trimming around the small cell technology itself, just because they are going to be attached to the city, already existing city infrastructure.
And not to third-party owned. When you presented the slide about the state statute change being specifically to city-owned infrastructure, did that mean it is not at all attached at any time to third-party infrastructure?
It still will be allowed to
Okay.
be attached to the third-party.
So for example, the alleyway behind my house has utility poles, Rocky Mountain Power poles, and it also has a ton of trees around it. It's in their people's backyards. So there's a lot of tree trimming needs that Rocky Mountain Power coordinates to manage. So I guess I don't take as much comfort to hear that they won't be in need of addressing tree encroachment on poles. I think there's a lot of areas where existing poles, especially when we look at third-party owned infrastructure, are within our
Within
canopy.
a tree's distance, yeah.
Yeah.
So the provision that we've proposed in the master license agreement is what we currently require in our franchise agreements. And we certainly expect that any tree trimming will be coordinated with the urban forester. You're right, I'm not sure we can say exactly what the impact would be. They do not have to have a clear line of sight necessarily, depending on what the infrastructure is. So providers have different kinds of antennas and things like that. Some of the providers use overhead wire lines, and those would run like a power line would. So there's, I think, maybe a possibility with overhead lines. When you're talking about your backyard and an alley, that is not a right-of-way. So right now,
The alley isn't publicly owned, you're
Well,
telling me?
it depends if it's in the backyard or if it's on an alley that's considered a right-of-way, but some of them are private. So it's not necessarily going to have antennas on it. But, you know, you're right. I think that's something we hope to accomplish with our design guidelines, our placement priorities, and maybe one of those could be avoiding trees. That's not something that we've fully worked through, but there's other times we've talked about it, like, is there a way to go in a location where you're not on a decorative light pole compared to a standard light pole? So we're talking about those priorities with the providers.
Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you. Dan, do you mind going back to one of your first slides real quick, just so I have a visual here as I explain what I know nothing about, but have a question about? So one more, this one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the one.
Super.
All right. So if whoever can give me a little bit more information on this, the small cell under the umbrella, about how far apart ideally would you or would you not want those? Like, how far do they reach?
So my understanding, and if someone wants to correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's a 250-foot.
Actually, you gotta come up and talk into a mic, sorry. And introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name's Steve LeVar. I'm with Verizon Wireless here locally. Around 250 feet between the nodes is what we're expecting.
Okay.
5G deployments are still being figured out, so we're not quite sure. So there's a lot that we have to figure out with respect to the technology.
And Steve, since you have the microphone, if you will answer a follow-up question for me. This will all make sense in a minute, but ideally throughout the city, how many of these would we want or expect to see? Hundreds, thousands? I mean, just ballpark it.
Yeah, so I would say hundreds is what we would expect to see deployment-wise.
Okay.
And I think it ties to the density in the area that we're looking to cover. So I think it ties to that.
Okay. You're off the hot seat, and I appreciate that. And now back to you.
But I want to recognize that was a single provider saying hundreds. We have 4 providers in the room.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you were answering on behalf of all 4 providers, but I'm going to assume you were not. So we could easily be in the
And
thousands.
so this brings me to my concern, which is item number 5. You guys don't have our staffing. You might have our staff report, but and that is the workload and staff levels. If we're looking at 75 from potential applications from
Per
one
month.
provider a month, how many staff members do you need to go through those applications and get things done in what we would hope to be a timely manner for, our business partners in a sense? I mean, what ideally would that take?
Excellent question. Not quite sure the answer just because we haven't experienced it yet, but I feel like that we're going to be challenged with that. I feel like it's going to test our capacity, absolutely. But I don't feel like it's going to be an ongoing thing. I think if we can get through this initial phase of getting them installed and on the poles, then it will subside dramatically. So if it's a staffing question, it may be something that we would need to look at on the front end of the installation, just to make sure that we, meet all the deadlines and the demand that there will be.
One more quick follow-up, and I think this is only because this is on my brain right now. Was this anticipated in the budget at all, that we might need to, it really seems like you would probably need another person. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
In an ideal world.
It is, and this has been a moving target for a couple of years, and we did not, it's been hard to really estimate when this is going to go live and when we're going to, be faced with this. And this has happened a lot faster than we anticipated, just with the way the state legislation went this year. So unfortunately, we didn't contemplate that with this year's budget, but certainly something we would need to look forward in the future to do, possibly.
Thank
Right,
you.
so the number of applications was set by the state law, which was passed in March.
Right.
We've talked to engineering about it because they, of course, process the permits, and I think they're working on what their staffing load looks like.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Wharton?
Yeah, can we have the representatives from the different companies who are here identify themselves?
We can bring a mic around.
Maybe if you could just give me your name, your company, and roughly how many you're planning on, just a ballpark.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Scott Harry. I'm here with representing Crown Castle, and we're currently working on a master license agreement. I think that to answer your question a little bit, maybe with a little more clarity for what's going on in the U.S., there are literally going to be
Scott, sorry, could
can interrupt
could
you,
we just
yeah.
have you come up the mics? And that's,
Oh, there it goes.
There we
I
go.
wasn't
Yeah.
close enough, sorry.
Yeah, just
So we're looking at probably close to 1 million new sites being built in the U.S. So you can imagine that a lot of those sites are going to be built in the larger cities, and then a relatively smaller city like Salt Lake City will see the same kind of percentage. And so Crown Castle right now is working on about 150 new sites, not in the city limits, but just all around in a lot of other cities, and we'll probably end up with about 40 here in Salt Lake City this year, but then next year maybe that many more, and the following year maybe that many more. So it's not like we're going to turn in 100 sites all at once. And the state law also allows for batching those applications all into one application. So if we had 10 sites or 20 sites, we could turn those in as one application. Is that, yeah.
When the sites have to be similar to batch them, so they can't do different kinds of installations under one application.
I just guess this is a follow-up question to that. Can these be co-located? Can two different service providers use one device?
Oh, yeah.
come on. We need a couple mics here.
Russell.
Okay, we are going to hold you to this one.
Sure, in some
Just
in some
kidding.
cases yes, and in some cases no. So co-locatability depends on the type of structure, the type of technology. Some carriers would say they couldn't co-locate with other carriers, but it's our experience. Crown Castle is an infrastructure provider, and we are co-locating multiple carriers throughout the country. So sometimes
I think
not
the
direct.
state law doesn't allow us to require co-location.
I'm not asking that. I'm just wondering if they do co-locate, and with that, because I know we've done several of these leases with co-locations, where if they do co-locate, in our lease, is there a stipulation that says we get the fee for the co-locator on top of that as well, if they co-locate?
Good question.
So,
We have not provided for the lease, but I'm not sure I'm totally following your question. Right now, they can only go on third-party utility poles. And under this version of the master license agreement, which will be in place through at least September 1, the companies will pay the city an attachment fee. That will change after September 1, where we're only allowed to charge $50 per attachment to city-owned pole.
right.
So
So let me
I'm
just,
not sure
let me
that
just-
we
let me
could
back
require
up a little
them.
bit. When we have cell towers on our properties, and if, let's just say Verizon goes in, and in the lease, they say we have the right to co-locate, but before we even sign the lease, we say, no, we will split the co-location with you, the fee on that, so that the provider who's allowing them to go on gets the split, but also the landowner, or us as an example for the city.
I'm trying to recall in a cell phone, like in a cell tower lease.
I would
how
have
that
to,
works,
I would have
but-
to look at the state law, but I think we're probably limited to only the fees that are allowed by the state law.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind following up, that would be great.
No problem.
Great idea,
Wait, can I
private
finish?
business person. Rogers.
Can I finish having my question asked? Because I have a second one.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Thank you. Who's next?
Kelly Kiesel, and I'm with Extenet Systems. Right now, we're looking at about 30 to 35 going
Per
in.
year.
Small cells. What was that? I didn't-
Per year?
Yeah, pretty close. We're looking at this year, just for this year only, probably 35 by the end of this year. So,
Pass that mic.
Nope, next one.
You'll find another one.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Richard Lee, and I also am with Extenet. Kelly's on the construction side. I'm what's called external relations, and so we're before you today for the master license agreement, and our immediate plan is a Verizon project. But I will be back in short order for a project for another carrier also in your jurisdiction.
Councilman Morton, may I ask or piggyback on your question of that, because he said 30 to 35 per year, but I'm curious, because it is such a good question. At the end of the process, how many installations there'll be? So is this 30 to 35 for the next 3 or 5 years?
Right now, I just want to know for the first year and an approximation.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, we can't have you just talking without a mic, because we have millions of at-home viewers tuning in
Wanna hear.
who need to hear this.
Millions.
no, like we were saying, like I was saying, this is for this calendar year. And
So in
we're-
total?
Yep, in total. And
No, I mean in total, beyond this calendar year.
Oh,
To Dan Ripp's question, do you have a projection? As our friend with Verizon said, hundreds.
Yes.
I think that was more like a big picture number.
You know what? That's going to be determined, on wants, and actually, like we're here with Verizon, we're actually doing a bunch of their small cells for them. So whether they we'll do some for them, and they will actually do their own, from what I'm understanding. So in what we're doing, we are doing, 20 to 30 with Verizon and other people, just like the crown castles of us too. So
Okay,
Okay.
let's pass the mic.
Thank you. My name is Nefi Garcia. I'm with Mobility, Davis County resident. And here for Salt Lake City, we're currently on the books right now. I have 15 sites planned this year.
Will you pull that mic up? We can't
Sorry?
hear you. Thanks.
15 sites on the
One
books right
five.
now, 1-5. For this year, we'll probably even bleed into next year. Probably on average, that might be the ballpark average here in Salt Lake City, 10 to 15 a year, if that. Case in point, we've actually built about 6 sites in Provo. And then it's kind of a rolling snowball in Provo. Now that I've made traction, I've got more work in Provo. So I got 3 sites in the pipe right now for Provo. So this year, there'll be 9, 10 sites in Provo.
So my last question is, thanks to all of you for being here. Is there anything that any of your companies are doing to look at bridging the digital gap in our community? And are there opportunities for the administration to work with you to bring digital access to our residents that don't currently have it?
And we could get a follow-up on that if we could ask.
Yeah, can we get a
Dan?
follow-up on that?
Work with the
do that for
providers?
sure.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
It might be helpful to distinguish, some companies are carriers, like Verizon, who are providing the service as well as maybe installing their own infrastructure. Some companies, like Mobility, might only be installing the infrastructure, and their customers are the carriers. So it's because it's demand-based, they might not always know.
Question about the monopole option. Is that up to the carrier to determine if they need a monopole or use an existing city-owned pole? Or the
Correct.
provider, excuse me.
Yeah,
It is?
that would be a part of their application. They would submit the request for a monopole.
Are there criteria set up in the statute about that, or is it up to their deliberations internally to present to the city?
I don't think that there is.
The state statute allows them to install monopoles, but the city would be coming up with, the design guidelines would cover that. And then also, if we're trying to prioritize the types of installations, there's places where monopoles might be more desirable than attaching to city-owned infrastructure and vice versa. And so I think that's something we would work through in the policy.
Okay, that's under our purview, though? You think so?
Within reason. We can't deny them the right to come in the right of way, but we can certainly try to work out locations that are mutually beneficial.
Sure, and just for the providers out there, unfortunately, we always work on negative experiences. You have one negative experience, it translates to everything. So that was my question about how much of that comes within the purview of the city design or guidelines that way versus the right of access to the right of way. Second question is budget impact. There's an ongoing access fee equal to 3.5% of the gross revenue, which, unless it's I don't know if this is exact language, but it says attributable to the company's network within Salt Lake City. Any idea how that's enforced? Do we have to look at the books of companies, or how does this happen exactly?
So right now, it's a similar fee to what we charge under the municipal telecommunications license tax.
Yeah.
And those companies that are subject to that tax submit reports to the city. And I think we would do the same process with companies who are going to pay that 3.5%, either as a tax or as the fee. I think we probably need to discuss with finance whether there's auditing rights or how they manage those. I don't know that part of the question.
Have we had any chance to look at projections for fees being brought in by this compared to the expenditures we're going to have to do? Because right now we have a hard time enforcing things, I think, just staff-wise. Would these cover enough to have the person, the first person in the middle of the chart, essentially? And is that one person who's identified as the point person for all of this?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. We haven't had the data to be able to make those projections, just because, as you've seen, as each provider has given you estimates of what they're going to be, it's been hard to really nail that down of what that translates to as far as revenue. And I know that the state, when this bill was passed, looked at this from the perspective of cost recovery rather than a revenue source.
Okay.
But
they assume to be a cost recovery sort of source.
So, under federal law, as well as the new state law, the application fees are a cost recovery. And I know that engineering typically includes inspections in their fee costs, the cost of doing inspections. There are some types of costs that are excluded from recovery under the state statute, but engineering has not yet done the analysis as to what the cost is for them to process these applications.
Okay. I got one last question that's for the providers, if that's all right. I'm assuming that you're basing location on the demand from whoever you're contracted with. If it's Verizon, I guess you do it yourself, but for everybody else, based on their carrier, is that accurate?
We're getting nods.
Nods to the affirmative, I'm taking.
Sure, yeah, so, yeah, that's exactly right. So when a carrier approaches Crown Castle, we'll either, in conjunction with their teams or on our own, design the network for them. And then they will comment on that and then switch things around, move things around. But essentially, it's however the carrier needs to cover that area, that's what we'll build.
Okay, so when we talk about digital divide, we're talking about carriers themselves to talk to?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Great questions, council members. Any others? My question was very closely related to Councilmember Johnston's questions around how tightly the state has restricted the compensation categories and the reality of us managing with this. And then as a next step on that one, in terms of looking at an ordinance, I would really like to see, going back to your number of potential sites in the city, how we would break those out. If we were queen for a day and we could say, these types of city-owned infrastructure are ideal for these kind of installations. These ones, which I know we know which are where, in terms of our ornamental lighting and other things, that we could say, this tier 2 we'd like to avoid installations on, and therein, is there an opportunity for us to, recognizing that we don't have a revenue stream here, but probably barely a functional net here from the permit fees and application fees, is there any opportunity for us to incentivize location on the infrastructure that we would prefer rather than the whole gamut of city-owned infrastructure? Can we create tiers, and then can we create incentives that work with our providers and the folks building those capital infrastructure? So can you work on that concept and come back? Yeah, please.
This might be associated, but just doing the math, is 5G going to run on anything else other than small cell that we're aware? The head shake means no.
So, no, the short answer is and it's really due to the spectrum that's being used. You just can't reach to the end user from a far distance. You need to be closer to the customer.
Okay, so while you have the mic, and thinking about some of the, I don't know, they're probably 10 feet tall at the most, are some of our neighborhood ornamental lighting fixtures. They're not tall. Are those, is that a height that you would really actually look at installing small cell on? Or is it really more those what do we call them, hawk light, not hawk light, someone?
We need to be a little bit higher than that, so we typically want to be kind of a minimum of 20 feet.
That's great.
But
well, I want to jump in because the statement earlier was about 250-foot range. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Give or
That's what
take?
we see as the pole density and the distance between the poles.
Anybody know how far it is from here to the wall over there? No,
40?
but the exterior
30?
wall.
60.
My point is basically this is
A city block face is 600 feet.
yeah. So you're looking at 2 to 3 per city block face, and if you do the math, you can see how many. If you're going to do full coverage on an urban area, long term, but that's a lot of.
And we have a minimum of one street light per block face. So that is, if we're only reaching our minimum, which we aren't even in some areas, then we do not have the integration.
Which means
right?
monopoles, right?
Done.
Poles being put up.
Remember, they're not, that each carrier
right, or Rocky Mountain power
wants to
poles.
be,
Yes.
I mean, I have heard as much as 1,000 feet, but that requires bigger radios. But if you figure a couple hundred feet per carrier where they need coverage.
So I hear this sort of implementation is rolled out based on the need. So 40 first year, those kind of concepts based on the demand. But if you're going to get, if there's a demand in the city, and I think as residents we want it, right? We want 5G, we enjoy that, we'll ask for it. But if we're going to ask for that, that means we're going to have a lot more of these. I mean, this is the tip of the iceberg potentially. And so we're not just talking about our power poles. We're talking about if you're getting full coverage on every block or close to it, there's going to be a large thing. So our policy's got to be pretty good. We're going to handle this well.
Please jump in.
To your point, Councilmember Johnston, the state statute states that an authority, being one of us, I mean, not us personally, but a municipality, can, where was I just reading that? That they cannot install a new pole under certain restrictions. So I think part of the worry that you're getting at is, you know, if we have one pole per block and that's 600 feet, then are we going to have all these little monopoles in between all of them? And the state statute says under subsection 6 that we can tell somebody they can't put a monopole if there are these other restrictions there. And so that can be a part of that design standard from what I read in the statute.
So the restrictions, I think, are a residential street that is less than 60 feet wide. They don't have the automatic right to put a monopole. I think practically we'll have to work out, though, what that means, because they also might not be able to attach easily to a light pole or other infrastructure that's there. So it will definitely take a lot of coordination on those locations.
And I agree. And to your point, though, I think that's part of that ordinance, because it does say that we can authorize it with written consent and if they fall into this. And I think that just goes towards how we write the ordinance and how we look at the ordinance and the design standards. And as to Madam Chair's point is that, if we have different tiers or things like that, we can be looking at making sure that we just don't have a bunch of these monopoles everywhere. Because I think that is a concern, but we want to make sure that people have access, right?
I'm less concerned about that, actually. I think I get your point. This is one of those backbone structures that's important to the city infrastructure. It's not a public utility, but it's getting close to it. And to treat it like that in our design, because it might be we have to master plan out a lot of parts of the city and say, this is part of the infrastructure now going forward. How are we going to do that, tying into our lighting infrastructure and other infrastructure pieces so that it integrates well, but people want the coverage. And so that's sort of in my planning. I don't want to think of it as sort of our old monopole concept of saying there's a big pole here and a big pole there, big pole there. If we want a smart city, and I'm not saying this is tied into that because this is private property, but it requires that sort of a network concept. And so really thinking honestly about what does a monopole mean in this context. It might not mean what we think it means. It might be able to integrate it with other lighting we may need all over the city and see how we can tie those together in our existing budget needs and see if we can master plan some of this out.
Okay, it sounds like we're going to have a great follow-up discussion to this when you get a little farther down the ordinance road. We're over time, council members, so can I ask if there's any other questions that we could? Looks like we're good, though. Ben.
Just to wrap it up, there's multiple items that may be coming back to the council. So an ordinance being one. Another would be the design guidelines. I'm not sure if those would be adopted by the council or they'd be brought back for input. There are also other master license agreements, as we've heard tonight, potentially 3 more on the way. And the current one before the council for XNet, since it would go into effect before the state law goes into effect on September 1st, it may need to be amended and come back to the council for an amendment. So there are several items under this topic that you may see again this year.
Great, thank you. Thanks for your work, Kimberly and Dan and Ben and Kira on this item. We'll wrap it up. See you again whenever.
Thank you for your time.
We have no public hearing on this. It's so bizarre. We apologize to our friends with the Metropolitan Water District who have been waiting patiently. Please come on up and we'll invite Sam Owen from our council office to give us our policy intro. Council members, we do have a paper packet on this one as well. I want to recognize former District 5 council member Tom Godfrey. Thank you for serving on the Metropolitan Water District Board and all the service that you've rendered to the city, Tom.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Sam, you want to start us off, please?
Madam Chair, thank you. Just a brief...
that door shut so we can hear you better.
Okay.
What is your time frame? Are you?
You are our final item.
What time do you have to be across the hall?
We don't have a formal tonight.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, good.
So we could, yeah.
But we'd love to, go to bed by 10.
We want to be sensitive to your time, so. So, okay.
I mean, we have 15 minutes. No, I'm kidding. Did you want to give us an update? Ooh, and it's at halftime?
Wow.
This is going to be an easy.
Okay. The Metropolitan Water District, just to give a brief summary, you're mostly all probably familiar with this information. The Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy is a governmental agency formed to convey water supplies to residents of the Salt Lake Valley. Through Salt Lake City's Department of Public Utilities, residents receive drinking water supplied by the Metropolitan Water District. The district also partners with a number of other entities to obtain water supplies from regions throughout the central portion of the state, including the Wasatch Back area. As part of supplying Salt Lake water users, the district operates and maintains water-related infrastructure across the valley and elsewhere. And Michael DeVries, General Manager of the Metropolitan Water District, is here. DeVries, I'm sorry, is here to present the fiscal year 2019 budget. The council appoints 5 of the 7 board members of the Board of Trustees for the district. Sandy City appoints the other 2. The council does not formally adopt the district's budget, however.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for this opportunity to visit with you this evening. We really appreciate it. And we'll try to be sensitive to the time element, noting jazz scores and so on. No, just kidding. We really appreciate the City Council staff. Sam and Lehua do a wonderful job. We really appreciate their support and just wonderful job. So we really
Michael,
appreciate them.
Will you introduce yourself?
Yes, so I was going to start introducing
thank
myself
you.
and then those who are with us. So I'm Mike DeVries. I'm the General Manager of the Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy. This is Tom Godfrey, as you most of you know, if not all. Tom Godfrey is the chair of our board, and he is also the president of the Provo River Water Users Association. So he plays some very important key roles for the district at this time. Also, we have with us Pat Comerell, who is a trustee and the secretary of the board. We also have, I believe, did John Maybe? Yep, John Maybe, also a trustee, made it in here with us today. We appreciate him being here. Annalee Muncie is an assistant general manager, and she does a wonderful job helping me out. And Laura Briefer, also with Salt Lake City Public Utilities. We really appreciate everything she does. Again, just wonderful staff, and she's a great support. With that, my thought was today that I could give you a brief introduction as to some of the investments that Salt Lake City has made into the Metropolitan Water District in the way of capital investments over the last decade plus. And so that was the intent of this presentation that I was going to quickly go over, and I'll try to be brief. But if you have questions as I'm going along, please stop me and please interject. So as Sam mentioned, we're a wholesale water district established in 1935 with Salt Lake City and Sandy City as the member cities of our district. And he also mentioned the terms and how those are set up with our board members. Also, we do have surplus customers as well. We sell additional water to Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District on a surplus basis as needed to some of their customers. Also, we sell to irrigators, and we've had others approach us as well. Central Utah, Jordan Valley have both approached us for additional surplus sales on a wholesale basis. This is a map that shows or provides kind of an outline of what the service area of the Metropolitan Water District is. The Metropolitan Water District does cover some county areas that are served by Sandy City and Salt Lake City as well, and so you can kind of see that not just county, but also recently incorporated, such as Mill Creek and some other areas as well. This is a summary of the water supplies that the Metropolitan Water District relies upon. These are very important to us. The Provo River Project, which is part of the Provo Association that Tom is president of, 61,700 when we have a full allocation. 20,000 acre feet from Little Cottonwood Creek on an average, not allocation, but on an average yield a year. Central Utah Project, Jordanelle Reservoir at 20,000 acre feet per year. Central Utah Project Future Water through the Strawberry Reservoir system, 5,600 acre feet, and Ontario Drain Tunnel on average 3,200 acre feet, and that's a priority or preferential right for Sandy City. And so when you add all that together, it's that 110,500 of raw water supply.
Mike, on that
Yes.
one, will you go back?
Yes.
The Little Cottonwood Creek yield is 100% going to Metropolitan, is it?
No,
That-
no.
or-
So there are other rights that are a part of that. So irrigation rights, water company rights. The majority of that supply, however, is available to Salt Lake City or Sandy City based on their priority rights.
And
So
is that, of those 5 sources, is that the one that Metro has the greatest portion of? I would imagine that.
we rely on all these. Probably one of the most important is the first one on that list. The
Well, that's
61,000.
not what I mean.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean of the total yield that Provo River Projects puts out, or the Central Utah Project. I mean, that's an incredible total yield that each of those produce, right? And we're
Yes.
we have an option on a fraction.
Right, just
of
the
those.
20,000 acre feet is all we're
Terms
getting
of-
out of the Central Utah.
In terms of the fractions
Yes.
that add up to our 110, is the Little Cottonwood Creek the one that we have the greatest fraction of yield coming from? Does this question make sense? Laura's nodding, but,
The greatest.
so, never mind.
May I try?
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry,
So if you were to take, what's 100% of Little Cottonwood Creek's yield per year? Any sense of that?
what is the yield typically?
Total to that creek per year?
Oh, total, that's a good question. I would say
Laura, do you want to come up?
30,000 acre feet maybe?
So we're looking at sort of our percentage of that. Is that the highest of any of these revenue, these sources?
Yes, okay, yes, it is.
Okay.
So yes, the Salt Lake City and Sandy City portion, or the metro portion, is proportionately the most out of the
Okay.
Little Cottonwood yield. Is that the
Yes,
question?
because then
Okay.
the thinking in my mind is where's our greatest potential for loss if there's a net decrease in yield, if
Yeah,
we're,
that makes sense.
if we're getting 1/10 of the Provo River project.
Correct. No, that makes sense. Good question. And obviously, Little Cottonwood is a direct flow right, where Provo River project is a storage right. And so yeah, you're right. If we were limited on our storage of the Provo River system, Provo River project in essence, that would be especially of concern to us if our yield was less. Proportionally, we would have less in that type of a scenario. So yeah, that's a
Thank
good
you for
point.
translating, Councilmember Johnston.
Sorry, I wasn't.
Director Briefer,
Quickly.
feel free to jump in whenever.
Would you mind if I?
Feel free.
So I would also just translate that, the answer to that question in another way for Salt Lake City, in that on the Little Cottonwood system, we actually hold about 70% of the water rights in that system. And Sandy City holds the other about 30%. Metropolitan Water District is treating our water rights and conveying those water rights, but they're extremely important to us in terms of our water right portfolio. It's also a very reliable water supply most years in terms of quality, and it's part of our watershed jurisdiction.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Any other questions on the water supply? Okay. Agency relationships, the main point of this slide here was to point out Bureau of Reclamation projects that were sponsored by local entities. So Provo River Water Users Association was a sponsor of the Deer Creek Division. Metropolitan Water District was a sponsor of the Aqueduct Division, which included the Salt Lake Aqueduct. And then shareholdership is maybe apparent, maybe not, but Metropolitan Water District is a 61.7% shareholder of the Provo Association. And the next largest shareholder in the Provo Association is the Provo River or Provo Reservoir Water Users Company at 16%. Central Utah Project, the Central Utah Water Conservancy District is the local sponsor for that 20,000 acre feet that we talked about from Jordanelle, and then also the future 5,600 acre feet from Strawberry Reservoir, the Utah Lake System water.
Can I ask a quick
Yes.
question on that one? So on the Provo River project, is that just happenstance that you have a 61.7% 61,700.
So
acre feet?
that's a really good question. We acquired 45,000 initially,
Uh-huh.
and then later, incrementally, we procured additional amounts. The last 15,200 that we actually acquired was related to an irrigation exchange with Utah Lake Distributing Company, believe it or not. So it was kind of incrementally added upon over the years.
But the total yield then is 100,000 acre feet for the Provo River project as a whole?
Correct.
Is
And so
that
ours would be
Is that static, or is that?
no, that's based on whatever supplies are coming
That's
into the
actually
reservoir.
It just happens to be 100,000
If
even.
there's sufficient water that comes from
Yeah.
runoff, then
Okay.
it can be as much as 100,000. That would be a 100% allotment. Does that answer
Yeah,
your
yeah,
question?
and
then
there'd be
ours would
nothing, there'd be nothing left in Utah Lake, right?
Well, actually, normal years, most years, it is 61,700 for us, which would be a 100% allotment,
Yeah.
or that 100,000 acre feet for the Provo
Okay.
Association. There are requirements, though, in order for Jordanelle and Deer Creek to reach the levels necessary for our allotment in Deer Creek and also for the Central Utah project. Utah Lake has to have certain levels achieved. And so
Yeah.
that's part of the Utah Lake Management Plan.
Factored into it?
That is factored into it. That's correct. Good questions. Let's see, maybe just really quickly, the infrastructure for the Provo River project, and these are really important in the way of conveying the water supplies to Metro and to others. Transbasin diversions, we rely on the Duchesne River and the Weber River. Supplies are diverted and brought over into the Provo River system. Deer Creek Dam, of course, is essential in storing the water. And then the Provo Reservoir Canal, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that canal in Utah County, roughly 21 miles in length, was enclosed in 2012. It was completed. And that enclosure project was something I was going to briefly touch on later on in the presentation, but a very important supply facility to our Point of the Mountain Water Treatment Plant. The Aqueduct Division, of course, the Salt Lake Aqueduct, and then Central Utah Project, the Jordanelle Reservoir, Jordan Aqueduct, and the Jordan Valley Water Treatment Plant. I would add to that also Strawberry Reservoir and the Utah Lake System water that I've referenced earlier. Yes?
Councilmember Fowler?
And you may get to this, and maybe, I don't know, but does any of your budget go towards, I mean, did that help with the building of the Salt Lake Aqueduct, and will it go for the east-west aqueduct? Is there any budgeting for that project as well? I'm just kind of figuring out some
good
of
question.
the
So the Salt Lake Aqueduct was completed as far as its construction in 1951. Metro was the local sponsor of that, and so Metro repaid that obligation to Reclamation and has since received title of that. So title has been transferred. It's now in our name. The east-west aqueduct is something that I think that's a Salt Lake City Public Utilities initiative, and no, that is not something that Metro is contributing to or participating in as far as capital investments.
Okay, thanks.
So, other facilities, Little Cottonwood Water Treatment Plant, very important facility for us. This one was completed in 1960. And I'm going to talk about some upgrades to that here in just a second as well. And then the 150th South Pipeline, which was really important with the Metro Water Project and being able to connect to the Jordan Aqueduct system and deliver water to the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City. Also, to add to that, Little Dell Reservoir, I didn't have that on the slide here, but Little Dell Reservoir was also a project that Metro was a local sponsor of, and it's an important water supply for Salt Lake City. Water storage facility, I should say. So master planning. So the Metro Water Project, we worked closely with Sandy City and Salt Lake City to figure out what the demands would be, projected those out, and then determined what improvements needed to be made, whether it was expanding existing facilities or adding new facilities to basically take care of the needs for the foreseeable future. We actually project at this point out to the year 2100 as far as meeting the needs of Salt Lake City and Sandy. That could always change, with the Northwest Quadrant changes, and who knows what else can happen there. But anyway, so the key facilities that were a part of the Metro Water Project that were on the capacity side were, number one, the expansion of the Little Cottonwood Water Treatment Plant, the Point of the Mountain Aqueduct, rather, which connects between the Little Cottonwood Water Treatment Plant and our relatively new, I guess, it's new to me, 2007 constructed Point of the Mountain Water Treatment Plant. So we have an aqueduct between the two, which allows us to send finished water either direction. And then you can see the additional non-capacity related improvements. The costs relating to the Metro Water project for the capacity side was $252 million roughly, and the non-capacity costs is about $8 million, so a total of $260 million. So just really quickly on the Little Cottonwood Water Treatment Plant expansion, original capacity was about 113 million gallons per day. We expanded it to 150 million gallons per day with the upgrades that were completed. Most of those completed by about 2007. And you can see the list there of different facilities that were upgraded. Some of the pictures related to those upgrades, one of the key facilities for the Little Cottonwood Water Treatment Plant is this Little Cottonwood Creek intake. A much better facility which allowed us to more effectively utilize the water rights that Laura was referring to earlier. We also added some treatment components or treatment technologies that we previously did not have. What you're seeing here are 2 liquid oxygen tanks that feed into our ozone system that we use for disinfection purposes at the Little Cottonwood Water Treatment Plant, which actually helps us meet disinfection byproduct regulatory compliance requirements. This is our 9 million gallon finished water reservoir, which was also part of the Little Cottonwood expansion. So the Point of the Mountain Aqueduct, there were actually multiple segments. There was a raw water segment that feeds into the Point of the Mountain Water Treatment Plant, and then there was a finished water segment, which I described a second ago, which was important because, again, it's that ability for us it gives us flexibility to run both plants and supplement water deliveries from either the south end of the valley or the north end, depending on where demands are. And the nice thing about the Point of the Mountain Aqueduct is that because of that interconnection, at Point of the Mountain Water Treatment Plant, we can actually deliver Little Cottonwood water all the way down to Point of the Mountain Water Treatment Plant through 150th South into the Jordan Aqueduct system, all the way up into the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City. So I don't know, that's probably pretty confusing, but the point is it's created a network between us and Jordan Valley, which has created resiliency as far as wholesale water deliveries, and it's a very robust and valuable system. So some pictures relating to the installation of the Point of the Mountain Aqueduct. The last segment that was installed in April of 2007, Shane Pace and Leroy Hooton in that picture. And then the Point of the Mountain Water Treatment Plant.
You have to tell them who those people are.
Oh, I'm sorry. Shane Pace, former Public Utilities Director on the right there, former Public Utilities Director for Sandy City. And then Leroy Hooton, for those of you who don't know, also a former Public Utilities Director for Salt Lake City. So, thank you. Metro Water Project, Point of the Mountain. So Point of the Mountain Water Treatment Plant, 70 million gallons per day initial capacity with the ability to expand to 151 million gallons per day. There was a reserve capacity of 30 million gallons per day for Central Utah, who also contributed to the project interest-free $10 million. And so if they choose not to utilize that 30 million gallons per day, at some point in the future, we'll pay them back interest-free that 10 million that they contributed. And again, treatment technologies are state-of-the-art, so ozone, UV, conventional filtration, but disinfection is very important, especially with cryptosporidium and some of the other challenges we have. So this is kind of an interesting bird's eye view of the Mass X that was taking place at Point of the Mountain when that plant was being constructed. So, of course, a very popular hang gliding destination. Yeah, no. Actually, I wouldn't mind, but I don't think my wife would approve. So, and then some more pictures of the construction, and then this is the operations building at the Point of the Mountain plant. I mentioned earlier the Provo River Aqueduct, so the enclosure of the Provo Reservoir Canal, and this was a really amazing project at a bunch of levels, but it really was important in that it helped, as that last bullet item I have listed there, it improved public safety, improved water quality, which is really important to us. Also capacity, we had a better ability to convey our full capacity that was available to us, and there was some savings. So there's an environmentally positive impact of this installation of this pipeline. 126-inch diameter, so 10.5 feet in diameter, so very large pipe. As you can see with the construction there, this next one kind of gives you a better idea of how big the pipe is. So it's a large steel pipe. Terminal reservoir replacement project. So this one has a very important impact on Salt Lake City. This is one that, so the original construction of the Salt Lake Aqueduct, terminal reservoir was part of that construction. It was completed as part of that construction in 1951. The concern that we had is that it was not, obviously back in that day, seismic concerns were not part of construction standards. And so looking at it, we realized that there was a very large liability, not only from a safety standpoint, but also from a reliable water supply standpoint for Salt Lake City, fire flows and so on and so forth. So we met with and worked with Salt Lake City and Sandy as well, because Sandy City has paid their proportionate amount as well because they are a member city, even though they don't take direct benefit from this. So we met with both member cities and coordinated a project that turned out to be a 5-phase, 7-year project. So it's a pretty lengthy project, but it's nearing completion. The aesthetic side of it is nearing completion. We're taking care of landscaping and things of that nature right now. The functional side of it was completed in late 2017, so it's fully operational, and so Metro and Salt Lake City are fully benefiting from this project. $42 million project. A couple of construction-related pictures. And then maybe just to mention on the financing side, water rates have been increased, as this body will likely know, a couple of times to help with covering the costs of the bonds that Metro is repaying for these projects. And then there's a portion of the payment that is related to what we call capital assessments, and those are related to capacity improvements. As an example, when Point of the Mountain Water Treatment Plant was constructed, that was an increase in capacity for the member cities of Metro. And so the member cities pay a pro rata share, a proportionate amount of the repayment on that. And that's part of what that capital assessment is. So, and then lastly, just wanted to mention title transfer happened for, as I mentioned earlier, the Salt Lake Aqueduct in 2006, Provo River Aqueduct in 2014. And the reason this is really important is it allows greater flexibility and I think better responsiveness by Metro and by the Provo Association as far as operations, maintenance, repair, all those types of activities, as well as financing. It gives us greater flexibility in the way of private bonds and things of that nature. So it's been a really good thing for us to take over ownership after we made those payments, completed those payments. And then this is from our SCADA project, so I always get a kick out of this picture. So, but any questions about the presentation?
Council members, if you haven't had a chance to go on a tour with some of the members, maybe you were going to make a pitch, Tom.
I'm going to.
Oh,
yes,
please.
I'm going to invite there are 4 of you I have to get.
Yes, we would be happy to.
Every time I think I've caught up, somebody leaves the council, so.
We do that.
I'll go again anytime.
Yeah.
It was great.
Worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah, we enjoy hosting those, so whenever is convenient, Tom and I are happy to make that happen. I had a few other highlights I was going to mention relating
Let
to the
me
budget.
get to questions first.
Okay.
Councilmember Rogers.
This is just an off-the-wall question and doesn't have anything to do with your presentation, but the zebra mussels.
Yes.
Have they made their way to Deer Creek or to Jordanelle?
Okay, so quagga mussels, similar to zebra mussels. It's interesting you bring that up. That was a concern that
and that had nothing to do with the Jazz game. Let's just clarify that. Zebra mussels.
Yes, no worries. Interestingly enough, and I'm not sure if this body is aware, but so Lake Powell is infested, and maybe that is obvious to everyone here, but so that is of paramount concern to Metro and to the Provo Association because of boats that are used at Lake Powell or even Lake Mead.
Or even Sound Hollow Reservoir.
Correct. And then they make their way up to Deer Creek. And interestingly enough, so there's an aquatic invasive species task force that has been put together by, I believe it's DNR, that is basically overseeing and making sure that boat inspections and the cleaning of boats and all those types of things is part of a program to hopefully prevent a quagga mussel infestation at Deer Creek or Jordanelle. Interesting thing though, there were some belligers, kind of the baby quagga mussels, if you will, that had been identified in Deer Creek, in a sample of Deer Creek water. How many years back was that? I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. And so it became a suspect water meaning that they had to treat it differently. In other words, all boats leaving that body of water had to be decontaminated. It has since, after a 5-year period of time, and all the testings in those 5 years leading up till now have been negative, and so it has since had that classification
back.
removed. So it's back to, but that hasn't taken away the importance of inspections and prevention. So that's continuing to be a hot topic and a push by everybody that's involved. For Metro and for the Provo Association, if there were an infestation, it would probably translate to millions of dollars in capital expenses and operation expenses and maintenance expenses. So yeah, it's a big deal.
And our concern is not if it's going to happen,
But
when
when.
it's
Right.
going to
Because it's
happen.
going to happen.
We know it's
That,
gonna
yeah,
happen.
good point.
And that's just,
Good point.
that was my follow-up question. Do we have something in place in case that does happen?
You know, we actually, as part of the Provo Association, one of the things that's being considered right now is an intake that can take water at different levels in the reservoir, which would help, because if one area gets plugged off, you can start pulling from a different area while you're maintaining and cleaning off the different areas. So kind of a multi-level intake, similar to what Central Utah has at Jordanelle. So that is currently in a pre-conceptual design consideration with the Provo Association. So, yep.
If there aren't other council questions on what you've done so far, then let's get into the budget.
Okay. All right, so I just wanted to highlight a few things. First of all, in the executive summary, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, but one of the things we did this year that probably hasn't been summarized in past years is we tried to provide a better summary of the sources and uses of funds to kind of help you see what the expenses and where things are going are. And then one of the other things maybe that's worth highlighting is the third, let's see, actually 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph down where it talks about operations and maintenance expenses. A couple of things to note relating to Metro and operations and maintenance expenses. One is, I think we've made significant progress in finding ways to save a lot of money with our chemical procurements. That's one of the large expenses we have is our treatment chemicals for our treatment plants. And we have found some effective ways to find cost savings with those procurements.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Just council members, we're on page 6 of 80, if you want to get in your packet there.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So the chemicals is one savings element. The other thing that Metro has embarked upon this year is a power efficiency study or effort with Rocky Mountain Power. And so we're trying to work with Rocky Mountain Power to find ways to pump at times that save us money and basically are more energy efficient. And to do things just in general with all of our facilities and how we manage them from a power usage standpoint. We're trying to find ways to build efficiencies there. So a couple of things we're trying to do to continue to save where we can on the operations and maintenance side. I think another thing that's worth noting is we do have outside costs that are a part of our operation and maintenance expenses. And one of them is noted there in that paragraph relating to Central Utah. One of the challenges we've had is they, in the last 5 years, approached us and informed us that they're increasing our cost drastically. And some of that you can see in the rest of the budget. But just to maybe highlight some of those increases in cost, currently our annual OM&R, operations, maintenance, and replacement cost to Central is about $400,000 a year. In the next 4 years, that will increase to $1 million. And so we've got drastic increases. It's a 50% increase for the proposed fiscal year 2019 budget, a 33% increase for FY20, and a 25% for FY21. So one of the challenges we're having is trying to manage our O&M costs with some of these outside costs that are coming in that, unfortunately, we as Metro do not have a seat at that board, so we have no governance in the way of control and input into that budgeting process. We have met with the leadership of Central, expressed our concerns, tried to encourage them to spread some of those costs over a longer period of time, but that has met with resistance and a lack of cooperation and support. So just wanted to share a little bit relating to the O&M side of that. I'm happy to answer any other questions relating to the executive summary if you have any questions relating to that. It does also mention that 3% rate increase is proposed for the upcoming fiscal year, and then for the next 4 years beyond, for a 5-year window at 3%.
Council members, questions? Councilmember Rogers?
I want to get your take on the Metro Board. You know, I understand that Sandy has 2 appointments and there's no term on it, but Salt Lake City, we have terms.
Correct.
So I want to hear the disadvantages and the advantages from your take.
Tom, do you want to speak to that, or do you want me to?
Maybe you should speak to that.
Okay, all right. My take from a staff perspective is, I think that, okay, so an advantage, I think, is sometimes getting a fresh view or a fresh look at things is not a bad thing. I think maybe a disadvantage, though, is tenure tends to be respected in a governing body, right? So new folks that are appointed are typically going, before they, how do I put this? I'm trying to be respectful. Sometimes they, when they engage, they're cautious with their engagement, I guess, before, until they understand all the ins and outs of our district, what the operation elements are, what all the different policy elements are, all the different parts and pieces of our district. And so for them to get up to speed, it takes a long time. Tom has been a board member for a long time now, and obviously doing a wonderful job for us. But when you bring somebody in that's brand new, they've got to start that whole learning curve process, and Sandy City will already have the leg up, so to speak, because they already have folks that tend to be reappointed over and over and over again. So that's just one perspective. So
I guess I'd like to get Director Briefer's take on that too. Is that something that Salt Lake City, as the Director of Public Utilities, that you would like to see change, that Salt Lake City has a longer stability on this board?
That'd be good.
Hi, Tom. I agree with Mike that there are definitely pros and cons to tenure on any board. That said, some of our longer serving members, such as Tom here, are great assets to the board with respect to institutional knowledge and a knowledge of Salt Lake City government. And so it might sometimes depend on the individual serving as well.
It's a good point. Yep.
I feel that way about some of you. Just kidding.
Thank you. I've learned from some good ones.
Any other policy questions, council members, budget questions?
I got a question about data on this. I know that throughout the state there's a question about having enough or valid water usage data. A lot of municipalities don't track very well, or districts perhaps. I'm assuming we do well, but could you help us understand from Salt Lake City and Sandy perspective what is right now required of each municipality by this entity or not required, and how much is left up to the city to determine how much they track these kind of water metrics?
I don't know that I can speak for the public utilities and what their requirements are, but for Metro, we do have specific reporting requirements. And we're very careful about our data tracking and data analysis. In fact, the last couple of times we provided reporting to the state, they've been very complimentary that it's as comprehensive as it is. And I think a lot of that's attributed to the technology that has been installed, SCADA improvements and other things that are allowing us to track that data and be able to utilize it, not just track it, but be able to utilize it in an effective manner from a reporting standpoint, but also from an operations improvement standpoint as well. And so that's a little bit more than what you're asking, but from our perspective, as far as the requirements the state has for Metro, the wholesale provider side of things, we're exceeding what those data requirements are. So.
But the cities can set their own benchmarks and metrics and all that individually. Is that accurate? Separate than Metro? I know you can do their own pricing, but I mean, is it
And you're talking about different types of water use data, correct?
Yeah.
Cities do have some latitude with respect to the types of water use data that they report, although I know there's a lot of interest at the state level to tighten that up across the state. Salt Lake City does, I think, a really good job on tracking its water use by category. So we have several categories of water use, and it helps us in our water conservation planning and in our long-term water supply planning. I believe Sandy City has a similar program. And cities are also have some requirements under state statute with respect to some of that tracking. We also have requirements under the water rights that we hold to track that type of water use.
And maybe to add one other thought related to that, conservation efforts relating to Central Utah Project supplies are required based on contracts. And so we're also meeting the requirements of those contractual obligations in the way of conservation reporting too. So just to add an additional piece of information.
Anything else, council members? Councilmember Wharton?
To give you a hard time for the picture of your facility where you're clearly watering in the middle of the day. Busted.
Yeah, okay, you got us.
I want to switch that out.
Yeah,
Switch out your practice.
We need to digitally edit. No, just kidding. Yeah, no, you're right. That is, and actually we do have a landscaping, I don't know if you want to call it master plan, but plan that we're updating, and it addresses all those issues. And yes, that is not happening in the normal course of our operations. So just as a clarification, even though I had a picture of it.
Councilmember Fowler.
I just wanted to say thanks for sharing this information with us. It certainly provides me a lot of clarity on all of no, there's no clarity at all actually, but it provides a lot of information. And I'm so grateful that this is a budget we don't have to decide on. So yay, good job for you guys. Yes, it is.
Well, we do approve it.
Well, yes, but there's not a lot of say on it, and that's nice.
And I would just say your excuse is that some of these photos were from 2006 or 7. That's why it was watering at that time.
It was still cool to conserve water.
Hindsight's 20/20, right?
Points well taken.
Well, thank you, Mike and Tom. Laura, thank you for being with us. Sam, thank you for this excellent staff report. And I do encourage council members who haven't been on the tour to make a time to do so. It is helpful to see the system, and made me appreciate even more our delicious drinking water.
Yeah, I'll be making contact after you're through with the budget. I know to wait.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. With that, we do have some announcements, I think.
We had prepared a group of tentative meeting dates in July to see when the council wanted to meet in July, since you don't have to meet more than twice necessarily. The chair has suggested a schedule that allows for you guys to not have a meeting the week of July 4th. You would have a formal meeting to fulfill that requirement on July 10th, and the other one on July 31st. And then would have a tentative date on July 17th in case you need additional meetings to discuss a GEO bond or something.
So some of us have older announcements that doesn't have.
Oh, gosh, sorry.
We got newer ones on our.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of paper.
Yeah, lots of paper today,
Okay.
sorry. So the revised one has like a chair suggested schedule and a current schedule, just to compare. The new one's got green. So is the council okay with that selected schedule? Okay. Yep.
And the reason on the 31st instead of the 17th is that puts a bit of an uncomfortable gap for me in looking at, we don't have an August meeting until the 14th or later. So that would give us 4 weeks without checking in, and get a little nervous about that. So, okay.
Then the other announcement is maybe just a heads up that for the budget season, we're planning on meeting every Tuesday. And we have Thursday dates listed as tentative. We don't anticipate needing those, but we have them listed just in case we really need it. We'll let you know as soon as we know if and when we need it, but certainly plan on every Tuesday, even the last Tuesday in May, just because it's the only way to get through everything. And then I think the chair has an update on the Jazz game.
It's not looking good right now, folks. There's 35 seconds left and a 10-point spread right now. Should we end our council meeting before the end of the game?
Yes, let's. Motion to adjourn.
Second. Unnecessary, but let's vote. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Go Jazz.
Nay. We're okay.
Oh.